"I can't pay you," Caleb Mercer said when the stranger on the fence rail dropped the rattlesnake with a single shot so close to his boot he felt the heat of the bullet skim leather. "Then pay me with dinner," she replied. The snake thrashed once in the dust and went still. For a breath, neither of them moved. Wind pushed across the dry pasture in a long, hot sigh, carrying the smell of sun-baked sage, horse sweat, and the faint bitter sting of old ash from somewhere far off in the hills. Caleb kept one hand on the hammer of his revolver, though the woman's pistol was already back in its holster. She sat easy in the saddle, straight-backed and calm, as if stopping death on a ranch road was no stranger than asking for coffee. He looked down at the dead snake, then back at her. She wore a faded blue coat gone gray with trail dust, a man's hat with a split brim, and gloves rubbed white at the fingertips. Nothing about her was soft except her voice, and even that had grit in it. "You always bargain this fast?" he asked. Only when supper's in danger of walking away, his mare snorted at the smell of powder. Caleb touched her neck until she settled. The sun was low and red behind the far ridge, bleeding copper across the pasture and turning his house into a black shape against the light. His ranch had once held 30 hands and 2 laughing children on summer visits. Now it held him, a half-broken corral, 12 cattle, and a silence so thick it sat in the rooms like another piece of furniture. "You ride into every lonely place asking men for meals?" he said. No. Her eyes flicked once toward the horizon behind her. Only the useful ones. That made him study her harder. There was sweat dried pale at her collar. Dust caked the hem of her skirt, and when she shifted in the saddle, just once, pain tightened the corner of her mouth before she buried it. "You're hurt. I've been worse. That wasn't my question. It was the answer you were getting." A board on the fence knocked loose in the wind. Somewhere behind the barn, a loose hinge gave a thin iron scream. Caleb had spent enough years reading Storm, Stock, and Liars to know when trouble was riding close. Still, she had saved his life, whether she meant to or not. He bent, took the snake by the tail, and flung it into the weeds. "Dinner, then," he said. She dismounted without asking another word. When her boots hit the ground, her right leg gave slightly. She caught herself before he could offer help. He noticed the dark stain at her side, almost hidden by the coat. Inside, the house smelled of coffee grounds, lamp oil. An old cedar smoke worked deep into the walls. The kitchen was plain, scrubbed table, cast iron stove, 2 tin plates hanging beside the shelf, and above the door a brass dinner bell that had not been rung in 3 years. His late wife Martha had polished that bell every Sunday until it shone like a coin in church light. Since the night the fire took her, Caleb had let the metal dull. The woman's gaze found it at once. "You don't use it," she said. "No, but you keep it," he set a pot on the stove. "You ask a great deal for someone paying with nothing. I paid with that snake," he almost smiled at that, but it died before it reached his mouth. "Name?" She pulled off one glove finger by finger. Her hands were small, knuckles scarred, one thumbnail split. "Eliza Cross. Caleb Mercer." "I know." That stopped him. The room seemed to tighten. Outside, evening wind brushed dry weeds against the porch steps with a whispering scrape. "How?" he asked. "Your brand is on every fence post from here to Dry Wells." Didn't seem a difficult riddle. He watched her lower herself carefully into a chair. She was pale beneath the dust now. The stain at her side had spread. "Take off the coat," he said. "I'd rather eat first. You'll bleed on the chair. That chair's seen worse." He slid the stew pot lid aside. The smell of beans, onion, and salt pork rose thick and warm into the room, homely enough to make the place feel borrowed from another life. Eliza closed her eyes for half a second at the scent. Hunger, real hunger, crossed her face before pride swept it clean again. Caleb fetched a clean rag and whiskey. "Coat." She hesitated, then gave in with the look of someone who hated witnesses. Underneath, her blouse was torn. where a bullet had creased her ribs. Not deep, but ugly. Caleb poured whiskey over the wound. She sucked in a breath sharp enough to cut rope, but didn't cry out. "Who shot you?" he asked. "A man who missed? That narrow?" "He'll be disappointed to hear it." He bound her ribs with steady hands. He had learned such work during bad winters and worse calving seasons when a man waited days for a doctor or buried someone before one came. Her skin was hot under his fingers. She smelled of dust, leather, and the clean metallic edge of blood. "You should be in town," he said. "I'd rather chew nails, so town's part of the trouble." Her eyes held his then, dark and level. "Would it matter if I said yes?" Before he could answer, hoofbeats rolled faint through the evening. Not one horse. Several, fast. Eliza's hand moved for her revolver. Caleb grabbed her wrist. "Not from my kitchen," he said. Her pulse jumped against his fingers. She listened, head tilted. The riders were coming up hard from the south road, spurs jangling, tack slapping, a cloud of dust lifting beyond the cottonwoods. "Do you have a cellar?" she asked. "No." "A barn loft?" "Yes." Too obvious. He let go of her wrist. "Who are they?" She stood, every movement controlled against pain. Instead of answering, she reached inside her coat and pulled out a leather-bound ledger wrapped in oilcloth. She set it on his table between the bread knife and the lamp. Burned into the cover in black letters were the words, "Rourke Land and Cattle." Caleb stared. Silas Rourke owned the largest spread in 3 counties, the deepest wells, the meanest riders, and half the sheriff's good opinion. Men went broke around Rourke the way grass died around drought. "What is this?" Caleb asked. "The reason I'm bleeding in your house." The hoofbeats were loud now, filling the yard. A voice barked outside. Someone hitched hard at the post. The porch boards groaned under boots. Eliza's jaw tightened. "If they find that book, they'll kill us both." Caleb looked from the ledger to the door, then up at the dinner bell hanging dark above it, and for the first time in 3 years he felt his quiet house choose a side before he did. He snatched the ledger, crossed to the flour bin, and shoved it deep under the sackcloth liner, just as a fist slammed against the door. "Mercer." A man shouted. "Open up." Sheriff's business. Caleb turned back toward Eliza. She had vanished. Only the faint hiss of her breathing came from the pantry shadows, and on the floorboards near the table, a single drop of her blood glistened red beside Martha's old brass bell. Caleb opened the door with one hand on the frame and the other hanging loose near his revolver. Deputy Harlan Pike stood on the porch with 3 riders behind him, all dust-coated and mean-eyed in the lantern light. Their horses steamed in the cooling air. Pike smelled of sweat, tobacco, and the sour confidence of a man borrowing power from someone richer. "Evening, Mercer," Pike said. "Looking for a woman, so I gathered. She's wanted for theft, assault, and the shooting of a Rourke foreman." Caleb leaned one shoulder to the jamb. "You planning to arrest every woman in the territory, or you have a description?" "Blue coat. Dark hair. Rides a sorrel mare, and lies when breathing." "That does narrow it," one of the riders spat from the porch. "Don't get clever." Caleb let the silence stretch until the wind moved through the cottonwoods and rattled the dry leaves like bones. "You smell supper?" he asked. "Because that's all you're finding here." Pike's eyes slid past him, searching the room. "Mind if we look?" "I do." That surprised them. Caleb saw it plain. Pike rested a hand on his holster. "This is law. This is my house for a moment." The knight balanced on a pin. Caleb could hear Eliza breathing in the pantry behind him. He could hear a horse stamping in the yard, harness leather creaking, the stove lid ticking faintly as heat shifted iron. He could almost hear Martha's voice from years ago, low and practical. "If a man means to break your door, don't help him lift the latch." Then Pike smiled without warmth. "If you see her, Mercer, you send word. Rourke's offering $50 for the ledger she stole, and another 50 for the inconvenience she caused. $100 buys a lot of inconvenience. Pike's gaze hardened. Careful. He stepped back. The riders mounted. Dust lifted around them as they turned toward the road. Caleb watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night. Only then did he shut the door. Eliza came out of the pantry with her revolver drawn low. Her face had gone white with strain, but her hand was steady. "You could have given me up," she said. "Yes. Why didn't you?" Caleb crossed to the flour bin, pulled out the ledger, and dropped it on the table. "Because if Silas Rourke wants something that badly, I'd like to know why." She stared at the book, then at him. The lamp flame trembled in a draft, laying gold over the planes of her face and carving shadows beneath her eyes. "You ever read another man's books?" she asked. "I can read enough, then read page 43. He opened it. Numbers marched down the paper in neat ink columns. Water shares, grazing parcels, mortgages, sales. Halfway down the page, one name caught in his throat like a nail. Martha Mercer. Next to it was a signature, not hers. Caleb knew his wife's hand the way he knew the shape of his own land. Martha looped her M too wide and pressed hardest on the tail of her R's. This was close enough to fool a clerk, not a husband. The page said she had sold the South Creek parcel to Rourke 6 days after the fire that killed her. Caleb's fingers curled against the leather cover. "She was dead," he said. Eliza nodded once. "Your wife wasn't the only dead person selling property in those books." He turned pages with a rougher hand. Names he knew. Widows, drunkards, men buried 2 winters back. Small places swallowed one line at a time and turned into Rourke land. "Where'd you get this? From Rourke's office? You steal for a living?" "No." Her voice hardened. "I steal back." He looked up. "That foreman you shot, I didn't shoot him." She sat slowly at the table. "He caught me in the office. Came at me with a branding hook. I hit him with the lamp and ran. His own man fired at me in the dark." Caleb believed that before she finished saying it, not because he was a fool, but because lies usually arrive dressed for comfort. Hers came limping and bloody, with no wasted ribbon. "Why?" he asked. Eliza looked at the brass bell above the door, as if choosing a truth from several she carried. "My brother owned 40 acres along Bitter Creek. Best water for 10 miles. Rourke wanted it. Ben refused to sell. 2 months later, somebody cut Rourke calves into our pasture. Sheriff called it theft before sunrise. Ben was found hanging in his own barn by noon. The room went very still. Wasn't suicide, she said. His boots were clean. Ben never stepped into a barn loft with clean boots. Caleb said nothing. I worked bookkeeping at the Drywells Hotel after that, she went on. Listened, watched who drank with whom, saw paper pass hands. Last week I cleaned Rourke's office windows while the clerk was gone and found the ledger in the safe. You rode here for me? For the land records. For your wife's page. She met his eyes. People in town say Caleb Mercer stopped talking after the fire, but never stopped remembering. The truth of that landed harder than the whiskey on her wound. He shut the ledger. Outside, a coyote yipped thinly in the wash. The stars had come out hard and white above the yard. If Pike comes back with more men, he said, this house won't hold. No. Then you leave before dawn. She gave a dry, humorless smile. There's the mercy I expected. Caleb went to the stove, filled 2 bowls, and set one in front of her. I said you leave the house. Her hand paused over the spoon. What does that mean? It means the old line shack at Black Ridge has a spring out back and 1 door instead of 4 windows. It means I know a trail no deputy with city boots can follow. And it means if I'm going to help hang Silas Rourke with his own books, I'd rather do it standing. She looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the spoon. Fair warning, she said. Helping me may cost you the ranch. Caleb sat across from her. Keeping quiet already did, they rode before dawn, moving through blue dark and brittle grass silvered with night frost. Caleb took the ridge trail, not the road. Behind them, his house shrank into morning haze. Ahead, the land lifted broken and red thorn brush clutching at their stirrups. At dry wells, whispers were already moving faster than horses. Men at the feed store stopped talking when Caleb passed. Old Mrs. Danner on the boardwalk pressed a hand to her mouth. A boy ran from the telegraph office toward Rourke's stable. By noon, a ranch hand from the next spread caught up at the arroyo. Mercer, he called, raining hard. Rourke posted notice at the well. Says any man harboring that woman loses water access by sunrise tomorrow. Caleb looked toward the far hills where his cattle grazed thin over dry ground. Without Bitter Creek water, the ranch would die in 3 days. The hand shifted in the saddle. Folks say you should turn her in. Folks say many things. They also say Rourke's riding out himself. Caleb glanced at Eliza. She sat straight despite the pain, chin up, rifle across her lap, not asking him for anything. He made his choice then, plain and final. Tell folks, he said, to keep clear of my land tomorrow. The hand swallowed. Mercer, keep clear. When the rider left, wind rolled dust over the trail behind him like smoke. Eliza touched the brim of her hat lower against the sun. You just chose a side you can't step back from. Caleb nodded toward the hills where Black Ridge cut the sky like a blade. Good, he said. Far off, from somewhere below in the valley, came the faint drumming sound of many horses gathering. By late afternoon, the air had changed. A man who lived by weather could feel it before he saw it. The wind came hotter from the south. The cattle bunched tight instead of spreading out. Ravens circled low above the ridge. Black against a sky turned the color of old brass. Even the spring behind the line shack seemed to run quieter, as if the ground itself were listening. Caleb stood outside the shack, one hand resting on the Winchester across his thighs. Eliza was inside binding fresh cloth around her ribs. Her horse cropped nervously at the thin grass, lifting its head every few seconds to stare downslope. Then the first hoofbeat came, not loud, not close. Just one dull strike of iron somewhere below the ridge, followed by another and another, until the whole basin began to thrum. Caleb moved to the edge of the bluff and looked down. Dust rose from the valley in 3 separate plumes. Riders, he called. Eliza came out with her revolver belted and her coat half-buttoned. She took one look and swore under her breath. He split them. Rourke knew the country. One group was angling toward the shack. Another was cutting west across Mercer pasture, where the cattle watered. The third rode straight for the ranch house. Caleb felt the choice like a boot heel in his chest. My herd, he said. My book, she answered at the same time. Then she looked toward the smallest dust plume and went still. No, your house. A smear of black had started to lift above the distant cottonwoods. Smoke, Rourke was burning him out. Caleb ran for his horse. Eliza caught his arm. Her grip was hard despite the bandage. If you ride home, the men below cut you off. If I stay, he takes the house. If you go to the herd, he starves you. If you go to the house, he traps you. That's the point. The smoke thickened, dark and ugly against the sky. Caleb heard Martha laughing in that house the summer before the fire, heard the dinner bell ring across a yard full of children and hired men, heard himself promise that walls and fences still meant something if a man worked hard enough. Then, the memory broke under the sight of fresh smoke. He swung into the saddle. Take the ledger and ride north. I'm not leaving you. You asked me for dinner, not obedience. A brief flash of anger crossed her face, then understanding, then something that looked too much like fear. Mercer. That draw below the ridge, he said. It narrows near the cottonwoods. Force the West Riders through there, and they'll lose speed. Meet me at the house if you can. If you can't, he stopped. Don't, she said quietly. He looked down at her. Dust was already climbing around them, warm against the skin, carrying the smell of smoke and hot horsehide. If you can't, he finished. Don't die proving a point. For the first time since he had met her, Eliza almost smiled. You first, they split. Caleb took the south cut hard, racing the smoke. Wind slapped tears from his eyes. Branches clawed at his sleeves. Somewhere behind him, shots cracked sharp as splitting wood. Eliza had found the West Riders. By the time he reached the home pasture, flames were licking through the hay shed roof. 2 of Rourke's men were driving his cattle away from the creek with blankets lit at the corners, turning the herd wild with fire and noise. Another was at the pump, smashing the handle with an axe. Caleb never slowed. He fired once from the saddle. The axeman dropped into the dust. Caleb slammed into the nearest rider shoulder to shoulder, sent him spinning under hooves, then wheeled toward the cattle, shouting, cutting between them and the flames. The herd bawled and surged, a wall of horn and panic. Heat struck his face like an open oven. Then a rifle cracked from the porch. A splinter jumped from the fence post beside his head. Silas Rourke stepped out through Caleb's front door as if it were his own house. He was a broad man, gone heavy with money, beard trimmed close, black coat buttoned despite the heat. In one hand he held a rifle, in the other he held Martha's brass dinner bell by its leather strap. You should have sold when I asked, Rourke called over the bawling cattle. Caleb swung down behind the well trough, breath harsh in his throat. Smoke rolled low over the yard. You forged her name. Rourke glanced at the bell, then back toward the flames as if Caleb had mentioned weather. She was stubborn, he said. Same as you. Did you burn my house? No. Rourke's smile came slow. I burned your hay. Last time I only sent men to talk. Your wife locked the door. Fire's an impatient thing. For a second the world narrowed to a red point. Caleb's grip on the rifle darkened with sweat. Rourke kept talking, not because he needed to, but because cruelty likes an audience. Ben Cross talked too much after that, he said. Couldn't have him stirring widows and drunks with stories. You understand. Caleb rose to shoot. A shot cracked from the ridge. Rourke's bell strap snapped. The brass bell flew from his hand and hit the porch boards with a bright, furious clang. Eliza's second shot shattered the porch lamp. Glass burst. Flame flared over the railing. Rourke's men shouted from the pasture. One dropped from the saddle. Another fired wildly uphill. Eliza came down through the draw at a gallop, coat flapping, rifle braced one-handed against the saddle horn. She looked less like a fugitive than a storm finally choosing where to break. Caleb. She shouted. Move. He broke from the trough and ran for the porch as Rourke fired. The bullet tore through his sleeve, burning a line along his upper arm. He hit the steps hard, slammed into Rourke, and both men crashed through the open doorway into the house. Inside, smoke and lamp soot blurred the room, chairs overturned. One window had been smashed. The table where they had eaten the night before was split by a bullet groove. Rourke drove the rifle butt into Caleb's ribs. Pain flashed white. Caleb answered with a fist that sent blood from Rourke's mouth onto the floorboards. Behind them, boots thundered on the porch. Outside, Eliza shouted a warning. Caleb lunged for his revolver just as Rourke snatched the bread knife from the table. They froze, chest to chest in the smoky half-light, steel and gun between them, each hearing the other's coming. Then from the yard came Eliza's cry, sharp, cut short, and the hard, sick sound of a body hitting wood. Caleb turned toward the door. Rourke smiled through blood. There's your second mistake. Caleb had one heartbeat to choose, finish the man who killed his wife, or go to the woman who had just saved his life. He lowered the gun and ran for the porch. Outside, Eliza was on her knees with Pike behind her, a pistol jammed to her neck and the ledger hanging from his other hand. Rourke's riders were closing in through the smoke, and the sun above the yard had gone red as a wound. "Drop it," Pike shouted. Caleb stopped at the top of the porch steps. Blood ran warm under his torn sleeve. Smoke drifted across the yard in slow ribbons, turning men into shadows and the sunset into a smear of rust. Eliza knelt below him, one hand pressed to her ribs, chin raised, though Pike's pistol was buried against the skin just under her ear. Rourke came out behind Caleb, breathing hard, knife still in hand. "You should have shot me when you had the chance," he said. Caleb did not turn around. Still deciding, Pike shook the ledger once. "This what you're dying for, miss?" Eliza's voice came rough, but steady. "No." "You are," Pike backhanded her. Caleb's vision went dark at the edges. "Enough," Rourke snapped. He came down the steps, wiped blood from his mouth, and held out his hand for the ledger. "Bring the horses. We leave now." The riders moved. One of them dismounted to haul Eliza up by the arm. Then the dinner bell rolled off the porch where Eliza's bullet had knocked it loose. It hit a rock, rang bright and wild, and spooked the nearest horse. The animal reared. Pike cursed. Eliza drove her boot heel backward into his knee. His pistol jerked away from her neck. Caleb moved first. He fired from the porch. Pike's gun flew from his hand. Eliza tore free and plunged under the horse's neck as Rourke shouted for his men. Shots cracked in a burst. Wood splintered. A horse screamed. Caleb jumped from the porch, hit the dirt, and grabbed the brass bell on the roll. Eliza collided with him an instant later. Together they ran low through the smoke toward the creek bank as bullets hissed through the weeds around their legs. They did not stop until the cottonwoods swallowed them. By nightfall, they were 2 miles north, hidden in the ruins of an old chapel abandoned after the cholera year. Half the roof was gone. Moonlight spilled through the rafters in silver bars. Wind moved through cracked plank walls with a soft, mournful hum. Caleb barred the broken door with a pew, while Eliza sank against the altar rail, breathing through pain. Neither spoke for a while. He found an old rain barrel outside, with 2 inches of stale water in it, and brought it back in. She held still while he cleaned the cut on her lip and rebound her ribs. She hissed when he tightened the cloth, and he hated himself a little for how carefully he noticed the tremor in her hands afterward. "You turned back," she said at last. He tied off the bandage. "So did you. You had Rourke. I had a gun." He sat back on his heels, didn't have justice. Moonlight caught the dust drifting between them, pale as smoke. Somewhere beyond the broken chapel walls, a night bird called once and fell silent. Eliza reached into her coat and pulled out a flat tin case dented at one corner. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a folded sheet of paper and a small pocket watch with the crystal cracked. "My brother's," she said, touching the watch. Ben kept bad time and worse company, but he knew every inch of Bitter Creek. Before they killed him, he wrote where Rourke buried copies of the land transfers, under the pump house at the Dry Wells livery. Caleb took the paper. Another sheet slid loose behind it, browned with age, and creased a dozen times. He unfolded it carefully. It was in Martha's hand. "Mr. Cross," it read, "if anything happens, tell Caleb I did not sign." Rourke came twice with papers and once with threats. I sent him away all 3 times. The South Creek is our winter water. Without it, the ranch won't last a season. The letter shook in Caleb's fingers, though his hands did not. "I found that in Ben's Bible after he died," Eliza said. "I couldn't make use of it alone." Caleb stared at Martha's writing until the letters blurred. He saw her again at this very sort of hour, lamplight on her cheek, flour on her wrists, telling him to stop wearing grief like it was the only coat he owned. He had not listened then. He had let silence harden around him while Rourke swallowed farm after farm. "I should have fought sooner," he said. Eliza leaned her head back against the altar rail. "Most people call that surviving." "No." His voice roughened. It was hiding. She studied him a long moment. "You know why I asked for dinner?" He looked up. "Because a table tells the truth on people." Her mouth twitched, tender and tired. A greedy man counts what's missing. A cruel man eats before the hungry. A frightened man keeps one boot pointed at the door. "And me?" "You gave a stranger the better bowl." He let out a breath that might have become a laugh in another life. From his pocket he drew the brass dinner bell. Soot blackened one side. The leather strap had burned through. He turned it over in his palm and handed it to her. "Martha's," he said. Eliza weighed it carefully, as if it were made of more than brass. "You kept it even after the fire." "I kept everything I couldn't bear to see." She threaded a strip of cloth through the bell's broken loop and tied it firm. Her fingers were deft despite the swelling at her knuckles. Then she held it back out. "Scars mean it lived," she said. He took the bell. Outside, wind shifted. This time it carried a new sound. Wagons on the north road. Voices, many of them. Caleb moved to the broken window and peered through the dark. Lanterns bobbed across the pasture below, more than he could count at first glance. "Rourke?" Eliza asked, rising carefully. Caleb listened. Not riders hunting. Too slow. Too many wheels. He heard the high scrape of nervous talk, the cluck of women settling children, the hitching cough of old Mr. Danner's mule team. Dry Wells was coming out in the night. He understood all at once. Word had spread. Rourke burned a ranch, shot at a woman, threatened water to every house that would not bend. Fear had kept folks apart. Fire had drawn them together. Eliza stepped beside him at the window, close enough that he felt the warmth of her shoulder through the cold draft. "What now?" she asked. Caleb looked at the lantern train winding toward his dark, damaged home, at the bell in his hand, at Martha's letter in the other. "Now," he said, "we feed them, below the hill." Lantern light multiplied across the black pasture like stars dropping to earth. And somewhere beyond it all, a horseman broke from the south road, at a dead run, carrying warning to Silas Rourke. They reached the ranch just before dawn. The house still stood, blackened at one corner, porch rail scorched, windows broken, but standing. Neighbors were already there. Women stirred kettles over trench fires in the yard, men passed water buckets from the creek, boys carried benches from wagons into the pasture. The air smelled of coffee, wet ash, fresh bread, sweat, and the sharp green cut of willow poles newly split for repairs. People fell quiet when Caleb and Eliza rode in. Old Mrs. Danner was the first to step forward. She pressed a loaf wrapped in cloth into Eliza's hands and looked at Caleb as if he were someone returned from a grave. "We heard," she said simply. Caleb dismounted. His arm burned. His ribs ached where Rourke had driven the rifle butt into him. None of it mattered beside the sight of his yard full of neighbors he had not asked for and had not deserved yesterday. "He'll come," Caleb said. "Mrs." Danner sniffed. "Then let him come hungry." By sunrise, the whole valley seemed gathered at Mercer Ranch. Men who had lost wells. Widows who had lost deeds. Ranch hands Rourke had underpaid. Storekeepers who owed him money and hated themselves for it. Even Sheriff Tennant arrived, red-eyed and stiff-backed, brought not by choice, but by 3 farmers who had relieved him of his sidearm on the road. Caleb stood on the porch in a clean shirt, with blood still seeping faint through the bandage beneath. Eliza stood beside the table in the yard where they had laid out the ledger, Ben's note and Martha's letter under a stone. Wind moved the paper edges. The repaired brass bell hung from a new leather strap beside the door. No one spoke until hoofbeats sounded from the south. Rourke came with 8 riders. They spread into the yard in a slow crescent, horses snorting, rifles across saddles. Rourke wore the same black coat, though one sleeve was torn and dried blood marked his cuff. He saw the crowd, saw the papers on the table, and his face changed very little. That made him uglier. "What is this?" he asked. Caleb stepped down from the porch. "Breakfast," he said. "Stay if you've got the stomach." A nervous ripple moved through the people. Eliza did not smile, but he felt it near him anyway. Rourke's eyes fixed on the ledger. "That book is stolen property." "So is half this valley," Eliza said. He looked at her, and for the first time anger broke clean through his polish. "You should have died in my office. Then you should have learned to lock your safe." One of Rourke's riders started forward. Caleb raised his hand, not to threaten, but to steady the crowd behind him. "We're done whispering," he said. His voice carried farther than he expected in the cold gold morning. "My wife did not sell our South Creek. Ben Cross did not hang himself. Rourke forged the names of dead people and took land that wasn't his. If any man here doubts it, read the pages." He lifted Martha's letter and read it aloud. The words moved through the yard like wind through dry grass. Faces hardened. Heads turned. Mrs. Danner began to cry without a sound. Sheriff Tennant stared at the ground. Rourke laughed once, short and hard. "A dead woman's note? A thief's ledger? That's what you stake yourselves on?" "No," Eliza said. She took Ben's folded map from her pocket. This, every eye turned to her. "There are copies buried under the pump house at the Dry Wells livery," she said. "Signed transfers, payoff records, names of every clerk and deputy he bought." Ben wrote the hiding place before they killed him. Tennant looked up sharply at that. Panic flashed across his face before he could swallow it. The crowd saw. So did Rourke. And in that instant, the whole shape of his game broke. He wheeled his horse, snatched the rifle from the rider nearest him, and pointed it not at Caleb, but at Eliza. The yard exploded. Men shouted. Horses plunged. Women dragged children behind wagons. Caleb moved before thought caught up, driving Eliza sideways as the first shot shattered the coffee pot on the table. Steam and black liquid burst into the air. Rourke spurred straight through the crowd toward the papers. Caleb grabbed the table edge and flipped it. The ledger slid under the porch. A second shot took the hat from his head. Then, the brass bell rang. Eliza had seized the strap and swung the bell hard against the porch post. The clear, piercing note cut through gunfire, through screaming horses, through fear itself. Men who had hidden from Rourke for years seemed awake at that sound. 3 ranch hands rushed his left flank. Old Danner's sons pulled Tennant to the ground when he tried to run. Mrs. Danner, God help her, struck one rider across the face with a cast-iron skillet. Caleb chased Rourke toward the creek. They hit the bank almost together. Water flashed cold and white around the stones. Rourke turned in the shallows, rifle half lifted. "You think this saves you?" he shouted. "No," Caleb said, stepping into the water. "It saves what's left." Rourke fired. The bullet tore through Caleb's sleeve again and spun him. Caleb answered once with the Winchester from his hip. The shot smashed Rourke's shoulder and sent the rifle flying into the creek. Still Rourke came on, knife in his good hand now, boots slipping on rock. They crashed together in knee-deep water, striking and grappling, cold spray soaking them both. Rourke was heavier. Caleb was angrier. For a few brutal seconds, neither was more human than the other. Then Caleb got both hands around Rourke's throat and drove him backward into the current. Water closed over Rourke's beard and mouth. His eyes bulged. His hands clawed at Caleb's wrists. Martha's face flashed before Caleb. The fire. The empty years. Ben swinging from a barn beam. Eliza in his kitchen asking only for dinner when the world had offered her nothing but debt. He could end it there. 1 more second. 2. Then he let go. Rourke surged up coughing. Stunned, Caleb hit him once across the jaw and dragged him by the collar toward the bank, where half the valley now stood watching. "Rope," Caleb said. Nobody moved at first. They were too surprised by Mercy to understand it. Eliza stepped down the bank, wet him dark with creek water, and held out a coil taken from one of Rourke's own saddles. "Justice first," she said quietly. Caleb tied Rourke's hands. Behind him, Tennant was already in the dirt with his ankles bound, and 3 men standing over him with shotguns. By noon, the pump house at Dry Wells gave up every paper Eliza promised. By evening, a territorial marshal from Red Bluff had been telegraphed for. By dark, Rourke and Tennant sat locked in the feed store under guard, while the people of the valley ate at Caleb Mercer's table, on borrowed benches, from borrowed bowls, under a sky scrubbed clean by wind. Later, after the children slept in wagon beds and the last of the coffee had gone bitter in the pot, Caleb found Eliza on the porch. The bell hung beside her shoulder, polished now by many hands. The yard was quiet except for crickets and the occasional soft stamp of a horse in the dark. A lantern burned low near the steps, making a small gold pool across the boards. "You never did get paid," he said. She looked out over the pasture where dawn repairs already waited for tomorrow. "I did. For one dinner?" For the right one, he leaned beside her, close but not crowding. "Stay," he said after a while. Not as command, not even as plea, just truth. Eliza turned toward him. The hard edge in her face had not vanished, but it no longer had to do all the work alone. "I was hoping," she said, "you'd ask before breakfast. Years later, folks in Dry Wells would still talk about the morning Silas Rourke lost a valley to a supper bell and a stranger who asked for dinner instead of money. They would say the Mercer place never grew rich, but it never went hungry again. Travelers learned there was always room at the table if they came honest, and on Sundays. When the light went soft across Bitter Creek, 2 names shone in the porch beam above a brass bell, Martha and Ben, remembered not with silence, but with bread, coffee, and the sound of people staying. At dusk, when the chores were done and the wind moved warm through the grass, Caleb and Eliza would stand in the doorway together and ring the bell into the open land, watching the sound carry gold across the pasture like a promise that had finally found its home.